Out here, past the edge of the maps, where cell signals die and the roads turn to dirt, something waits. These are real places, state parks, forgotten trails, and haunted backwoods across Florida, told by the survivors themselves, or those who never came back the same. Turn off the lights, plug in your headphones, and remember, some campsites should never be visited alone. Before we begin the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel to see more stories like this. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Tyler Morgan. I'm 24 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I've been hungry for adventure. It's not that I crave danger. I'm not an adrenaline junkie who jumps off cliffs or out of airplanes. But there's always been a small voice in the back of my head saying, "Get out there, see what's real." That voice grew louder in my last semester of college, as if telling me I was missing something vital in life. Maybe that's why I found myself in the heart of Jonathan Dickinson State Park, Florida, accompanied by my cousin Jason and my girlfriend, Danny, on the most harrowing trip of my existence. I can't shake the memory of how this all started. The sun beating down on us with a scorching intensity, the thick Florida humidity turning every breath into a battle, the mosquitoes whining around my ears like tiny, angry saw blades, and the sense, immediate, visceral, that something was wrong in that place. Before we set foot in the park, we'd made a rough plan. I was going to document lesser-known trails for my up-and-coming hiking blog, an amateur venture, but one that had been gathering a small following. Jason, 26, had only recently come back from overseas military service. He was dealing with what he called the ghosts in my head, a swirl of nightmares that had made him restless and anxious around crowds. We'd both agreed that some time in nature might do us good. Danny, my girlfriend, is 22. She's an artist at heart, paints, sculpts, writes poems in the margins of her sketch pads. She believes in spiritual energy, good or bad, and she has an unnerving knack for sensing when something is off. She doesn't claim to see ghosts or read minds, but she trusts her gut more than I do. We borrowed my uncle's weathered old RV. It was a beat-up model from the 90s, complete with peeling, vinyl stripes, and an engine that sputtered like an asthmatic cough. But we figured it would at least keep us safe from snakes and random Florida downpours if we decided to camp near the trailheads at night. Driving into Jonathan Dickinson State Park, I noticed that the dryness in the air was uncharacteristic of Florida. Normally, you step out and you feel like you've entered a steam room, but this time the earth was cracked in places, the leaves slightly wilted. We rolled through miles of pine flatwoods and scrub, the Loxahatchee River glinting in the distance. I remember thinking, this place looks thirsty. Still, the park was beautiful. Towering slash pines, palmetto undergrowth, white sandy trails. The perfect place to gather photos and show the lesser-seen side of Florida's wilderness. I switched off the RV engine, and the three of us stepped out into a chirping world of insects and birds. Jason inhaled deeply, as if he was trying to quiet some voice in his own head. Danny stretched her arms and said, "I keep dreaming about black water. I don't know why." I laughed, ignoring the flicker of concern on her face. "Well, there's a river right over there. That might be why." She shrugged but wouldn't meet my eyes. We spent the first evening setting up our spot. Park ranger had told us about a quieter loop we could explore, far from the typical tourist trails. The plan was to wake early, drive the RV close to the trailhead, and hike for the day. With any luck, we'd get some stellar photos of local wildlife and interesting flora. Right away, the problems started. The RV's coolant line developed a slow leak. We found a small puddle of green fluid beneath the engine, and Jason, the designated mechanical expert, grumbled under his breath. He tried patching it up, but none of us felt entirely confident that it would hold. "If the patch fails," Jason said, "we might not be driving out of here." "Great," Danny said, rummaging for duct tape and a flashlight. I tried to lighten the mood, but the air between all of us carried an unspoken weight. Jason, still, looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes, and every so often I caught him scanning the tree line as though expecting an ambush. Danny hovered near him, offering him water or a quiet pat on the shoulder. I felt a sting of jealousy, maybe even confusion, at how she'd grown so close to him in such a short time. Usually, I was the one who comforted her, not the other way around. That night, after the sun dipped below the pines, we found ourselves cooking pasta on a small propane stove. Lightning bugs flickered in the distance, and the constant hum of cicadas grew so loud we almost had to shout over it. Somewhere, an owl hooted. "I'm glad we're out here," I said, trying to break the tension. I needed this break. Jason stirred the pasta, his gaze distant. "I hope it's worth it." Danny just nodded, still looking uncomfortable. "I had a dream about a circle of ash and feathers," she said suddenly, almost blurting it out. "I don't know what it means, but it felt dark." I half laughed. "Feathers and ash?" "Probably just your brain mixing up all the random ghost stories we read about Florida." "Don't worry, babe," she said nothing. Outside, the wind changed direction, and the crickets seemed to skip a beat. We woke at dawn to begin our hike. Danny complained of a headache, but insisted she'd walk it off. We left the RV on one of the less traveled roads. I remember how quickly we lost cell reception. One moment we had a single bar, and then it dropped to no service. Jason relied on an old paper map, but a corner of it was water damaged from an earlier spill. We tried to piece it together with a phone screenshot of the area, but the phone refused to load more than a blurry image. About half a mile down the trail, we came across a raccoon, or what was left of it. The poor creature looked like it had been attacked by a much larger predator, most likely a bobcat or coyote. But something about it felt too clean. The bones were licked almost white, with no flies or insects around, as if it had just happened. Jason knelt down and stared at it for a good minute. Then he stood up and shook his head. Danny paled visibly. I tried to tell myself we'd simply stumbled upon a fresh kill. Still, the eerie stillness around that carcass made my stomach twist. We pressed on. Around mid-morning, we reached a section of pine scrub that was unnervingly silent. No birds, no wind. Danny picked up a handful of leaves and frowned. "They're so brittle," she whispered, "like they died in a drought." Jason shielded his eyes from the sun, scanning the treetops. "Feels wrong here. Maybe we should head back." But I was determined to push forward. My blog needed unique content, and this silent, haunting environment was certainly unique. I snapped a few pictures and convinced them to keep going. That's when Danny found the first strange symbol, a spiral of white ash and feathers by the trunk of a gnarled oak. It looked deliberately placed, maybe a foot and a half wide. As she called me over, my heart gave a jolt. I didn't want it to look man-made, but it did. Jason knelt beside it. "Could be some sort of local cultural marker," he murmured. "A warning, maybe?" "A warning for what?" I asked. He shrugged, then ran a hand over the scar on his left forearm. "Back. When I was stationed overseas, we'd sometimes see wards or markings on houses. They were meant to keep evil away." He gave me a sidelong glance. "Or keep it in." I forced a laugh to keep the mood from spiraling. "Probably just a prank by some bored hiker, right?" Danny's face was pale, but she said nothing, just rubbed at her temple. We left the spiral intact and moved on. Later that day, the heat grew nearly unbearable. Even with water breaks, we felt drained. I suggested we return to the RV, get the AC going, and rest. That's when we realized we were slightly off track. A path we'd marked with pink survey tape was gone. At first I thought maybe we'd just taken a wrong turn, but Jason insisted it had been the same route. The big pine with the twisted branch near its top, he swore we'd passed it 30 minutes ago going the opposite direction. By the time we stumbled back to the RV, The sun was dipping low. My shirt was soaked through, my feet dragged. We were hungry, and our mood was sour. I tried to start the RV engine to blast the air conditioning, but the engine sputtered. The coolant patch hadn't held. We had to turn it off to avoid a total meltdown. Darkness fell like a curtain. We lit a lantern, rummaged for peanut butter sandwiches and chips. The night sounds returned: cicadas, frogs, the occasional owl. I told myself we'd fix the RV at first light. We'd get out of here. We'd laugh about it in a few weeks, maybe. That's when we heard the knock on the side of the RV. 3 taps. Light, almost shy. Jason snapped his head up. Danny sat down. Her sandwich. I froze. A second set of taps came, softer, from the opposite side. Then the crickets went quiet. "Hello?" Danny whispered. No reply. I went to the RV window and peered out, shining my flashlight. The beam caught only tree trunks and palmetto fronds. I swallowed hard, my gut twisting. Could be an animal, I told myself. Maybe a raccoon scurrying around. But the knocks had been deliberate, spaced in time, as if waiting for a response. Jason was already unzipping his sleeping bag. "I'll check," he said. Before I could protest, he was out the door, scanning the area with his own flashlight. Danny gripped. My arm so hard it hurt. From outside, Jason called, "Nothing here, man." I mustered up the nerve to join him. We circled the RV. No footprints, no sign of any creature. The forest edge looked as undisturbed as before. Only the hush of the night remained. But a shiver ran down my spine, and the hair on my arms stood up. We're just scaring ourselves, I reasoned. That night, none of us slept well. Day 3. We woke, stiff and unrested. Jason had deeper circles under his eyes, as if he hadn't slept at all. Danny looked pale, pressing a hand to her head again, complaining her headache was worse. I worked on the coolant line with a better patch kit, certain I could at least get the RV limping along. Jason left to gather some water from a spigot near the main road. He didn't come back for hours. By midday, Danny and I were frantic. We walked the road, calling his name. The park was large, but the spigot he'd mentioned was only a mile away. He couldn't have gotten lost that easily. We searched for footprints, asked passing hikers. Nobody had seen him. We eventually doubled back, hoping he might return to the RV. Danny kept glancing over her shoulder as if she heard footsteps behind us. At one point, she reached out and clutched my arm, breath hitching. "Tyler, I swear someone's following us." I turned around, ready to shine my flashlight if need be. All I saw were shadows among the pines. "There's no one there," I said, but even I heard the tremor in my voice. We returned to the RV by late afternoon, fighting off mosquitoes and an ever-growing sense of dread. There, sitting on a folding chair by the extinguished campfire, was Jason, just sitting, hands clasped, staring at the ground. I rushed over. "Where the hell did you go? We've been calling you for hours." He glanced up at me with hollow eyes. "I didn't go anywhere. I woke up here," he murmured. "I never left." But Danny and I exchanged a confused look. Jason's hair was damp with sweat, his forearms streaked with dirt. He seemed disoriented, more so than normal. I put a hand to his forehead. "You feel hot, like you've been out in the sun. Are you sure you're okay?" He closed his eyes. I was in the RV. Then I heard voices. Next thing I know, I'm out here. Time's messed up. That evening, Danny and I decided it was best to stay close together. We'd eat, rest, and first thing in the morning, we'd drive out of the park even if it meant stopping at the ranger station. But the moment we tried to start the RV, the engine refused. The coolant patch was holding, but now the battery light blinked ominously. We had a generator, but the spark wouldn't catch. It was like every piece of technology we owned was failing at once. As dusk settled, the undergrowth took on warped silhouettes in the lantern glow. We built a small fire near the RV, park rules be damned, hoping the light would comfort us. Danny insisted on sleeping inside the RV, so we folded the table into a makeshift bed. Jason lay across from her, leaving me near the driver's seat. We cut the lantern to save fuel, letting only the moonlight spill through the windows. The silence was suffocating. Then, sometime past midnight, I awoke to a soft, raspy whisper. "Tyler." It sounded like Danny's voice, but it came from outside. I jolted upright, my heart hammered. Danny was lying just a few feet away, fast asleep, and yet the whisper came again. "Tyler, come out." I forced my breathing steady. Maybe I'm dreaming. I closed my eyes, tried to calm down. But the door handle rattled, slow, cautious, like someone trying to open it without making too much noise. Suddenly, Jason sat bolt upright, sweat beading on his forehead. "Don't open it," he said. "It's outside." I wondered if he was awake or in some nightmare. But he turned to me, eyes wide, and repeated, "Don't open the door." The handle rattled again. I realized with horror that we hadn't locked it. In a single motion, I lunged and twisted the lock. The rattling ceased. The wind picked up, and in the pale moonlight I saw a silhouette move past the window. It glided, stooped, arms hanging long at its sides. Human? I couldn't tell. Its shape was wrong. For 5 minutes, or maybe an hour, we sat in silence, listening to that presence circle the RV. We heard it tapping on each window, one after another, a methodical, patient pattern. Nobody spoke. Eventually, the tapping stopped, but none of us dared fall back asleep. Morning felt like stepping out of a nightmare into an uneasy reality. Birds were chirping, the sun high. Danny was nearly in tears, her headache raging, her eyes puffy from lack of sleep. Jason looked lost, pacing around the campsite like a caged animal. I had a thought. My phone. I had used it to record some nature sounds the day before for the blog. Maybe I could capture the strange night noises. I played back the last recording. At first, it was just wind and crickets, then the faint scratch of footsteps, and finally a whisper so quiet I had to press the speaker to my ear. "She doesn't trust you." The words were spoken in my own voice. My blood turned cold. Danny heard it too. She stared at me, horror etched in her face. "Why would you say that?" she asked quietly. "I didn't," I whispered back. Jason, hearing this, clenched his fists. "This place is messing with us," he said. "It's in our heads." We tried to make sense of the situation. Jason mentioned a name he'd heard from a fellow Marine who was part Seminole, Yatashi, a shapeshifter or spirit tied to vengeance and grief. Supposedly, it lurked in wetlands and riverbanks, mimicking voices and drawing people away. I laughed. It off initially, but the pieces started to align with our experiences. The strange markings, the circles of feathers, the empty carcasses. "Could be any superstition," I said, but my voice trembled. "We're freaked out, seeing patterns where there aren't any." "Are we?" Jason asked. "Look at Danny. She's sick. This place, it's feeding off us." I turned to Danny and she gave a small, miserable shrug. "I don't know what I believe," she said, "but if there's something real out here, we have to respect it, or it's going to keep hurting us." We spent the day trying to find a ranger station. The map was nearly useless and our phone battery was critically low. We set out on foot, hoping to run into official trails. I placed pink tape along trees every so often to mark our route. Jason walked ahead, alert, scanning for movement. Danny and I trudged behind, hearts pounding whenever branches snapped or leaves rustled. At one point, we discovered a second spiral of white ash and feathers. Only this one had a small carved figurine in its center, like a little totem. The figurine looked vaguely human, but its face had an exaggerated grin. Danny wanted to destroy it, but Jason stopped her. "Don't. We don't know if that'll make it worse." So we left it and kept moving. About an hour later, we heard running water. Hoping it was near a ranger station, we pushed through a thicket of palmetto and came upon a small creek. The water was oddly dark, like black tea. It gave off no reflection, and I felt a surge of unease. A breeze rippled across the surface, and in that ripple I imagined faces swirling in the murk. Suddenly, Jason pointed upstream. "Anyone else? See that?" I followed his gaze. On the opposite bank stood a deer. No, something that looked like a deer. It was bone-thin with wide, unblinking eyes. As if sensing us, it lifted its muzzle, twisted its head at an unnatural angle, and vanished into the scrub. Danny broke the silence. "That wasn't normal. Deer don't move like that." Jason just nodded. "We go back," he said. "Now." None of us argued. By dusk, we were back at our crippled RV. Exhaustion weighed us down. We built another fire, carefully piling wood, wanting the largest flames possible. None of us wanted to be in the dark again, with that thing circling. But the night came, relentless. The firelight cast flickering shadows against the trees, making them dance like phantom silhouettes. Danny sat close to Jason, whispering about her dreams. I caught snippets of words like black water and hands in the river. She seemed half delirious. I was upset. There was a wedge between us, and I didn't know how to fix it. Not. Long after midnight, a dense fog rolled in. It was so thick that we couldn't see more than a few feet beyond the fire. Everything seemed muffled, like we'd been sealed in cotton. The flames popped and crackled, unnaturally bright against the shapeless dark. Then, just at the edge of my vision, I saw a figure step out of the fog. My heart pounded. Jason. But Jason was right next to me. Danny. She was on my other side. This figure looked like me. My same height, hair, even the same shape of my face in the flickering light. I felt as though I was staring into a mirror, except his eyes glowed faintly red in the reflection of the fire. "Hello," I croaked. It smiled, a slow, predatory grin, lips curling back far too wide, and it walked backward into the fog, disappearing, without a sound. Jason seized my arm. "What the hell did I just see?" I swallowed. It looked like me. Danny let out a ragged cry, burying her face in her hands. "This isn't real," she mumbled. "It can't be real." But it was real enough to us. Something snapped in Jason. He leapt to his feet, grabbed the nearest flashlight, and strode into the fog. I called after him, but he only shouted, "We can't just sit here. This thing's toying with us." Danny and I followed, stumbling through the haze. The fire's glow quickly faded behind us, and we were plunged into a world of shifting gray shapes. The ground was uneven, covered in pine needles that muted our steps. Branches reached out like skeletal hands. My heart thundered in my chest. We heard Jason's voice just ahead. "Tyler, Danny, come here, hurry." We rushed forward, but as we did, we heard a second Jason's voice whisper behind us. "Don't trust him. He's not me." Danny whirled. Around, eyes wide, tears sliding down her cheeks. We found Jason in a small clearing. He stood, shaking, pointing his flashlight at a tree trunk. Nailed to the bark were pages from Danny's dream journal, each page scrawled with lines in my own. Handwriting, but the words made no sense. Random phrases like "she doesn't trust you" repeated over and over, forming circles, spirals. My stomach churned. "I never wrote that," I whispered, but it was unmistakably my handwriting. Danny looked at me with fear in her eyes. "What's happening, Tyler?" Before I could answer, a branch snapped. We spun around to see a second figure approach. It was me again, or at least something wearing my face. Beside it, just visible in the swirling fog, was another shape, like a tall, emaciated figure draped in pale skin. Its arms were too long, its fingers crooked like talons. It seemed to watch us with a hungry interest. Jason raised his flashlight, beam trembling. "Stay back." Both figures advanced. The one that looked like me smiled again, an unnerving imitation of a human expression. Then it vanished into the fog. The taller figure lingered, cocking its head to one side. Its mouth opened in a silent moan, revealing blackness inside. Then it, too, disappeared among the drifting fog banks. In the adrenaline-fueled chaos, we lost track of each other. Danny shouted my name, but I spun in circles, disoriented by the thick air. I called out for Jason, but the echoes came back distorted, like multiple voices were repeating my calls. Eventually, I found Danny huddled near a pine, shivering. "Jason," she said. I heard him. But then I saw... She broke off, eyes searching the darkness. I don't know if it was him. We followed the faint glow of our campfire until we were close enough to see the outlines of the RV. The fog thinned, letting us glimpse a shape lying on the ground. We rushed over, hearts lodged in our throats. It was Jason, unconscious or worse. When we rolled him over, he groaned. Relief flooded me, but his face was drawn, and he looked as though he'd witnessed something unspeakable. He opened his eyes, focusing on me. "Tyler." I saw it. "It wears your face." I helped him to his feet. Danny hovered nervously, scanning the tree line. I expected some further explanation, but Jason only trembled, his breath uneven. We eased him back into the RV, locked every door and window, and huddled together under the faint battery glow of a lantern. None of us slept. Sometime near dawn, Danny dozed off on Jason's shoulder, and I found myself staring at the ceiling of the RV, exhaustion pressing down on me like a weight. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that whisper. "She doesn't trust you." I must have dozed off too, because I jerked awake at a sudden sound, like nails scraping metal. Outside, the fog had cleared, and the faint morning light filtered through the windows. I peered out cautiously. Standing about 10 feet away was a single silhouette. My throat tightened. It was shaped like a person, with long, spindly limbs. It stared at me, or at least it faced in my direction. Then it turned and walked slowly into the woods. I felt compelled to follow it. My mind buzzed with the idea that if I confronted this thing, it might end the nightmare. I slipped out of the RV as quietly as I could, not wanting to wake Jason or Danny. My feet felt like lead, but I pushed on, determined to do something rather than wait for another attack. The figure led me deeper, into the scrub, winding around palmettos and slash pines. My breath echoed in my ears. The morning light was pale, casting the forest in a gray hush. Finally, the figure stopped in a small clearing. I recognized the same spiral of white ash and feathers from before, only now it was bigger, more elaborate. At the center lay a deer, skull, polished bone white. The figure turned to face me and vanished, like a shadow slipping out of existence. I approached the circle. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I stepped closer, driven by a horrified fascination. Was this Yatashi's lair? Some kind of ward or trap? Then I heard Danny's voice behind me. "Tyler, wait, don't step inside." I whirled around to see both Danny and Jason emerging from the trees. They had followed me. Danny's eyes shone, with tears. "You almost walked right into it," she said. Jason's voice was shaky. "We burn it," he said simply. "I don't know if it'll stop it, but I can't see any other way." I didn't fully understand his logic, but I nodded. We gathered dry branches and palm fronds, placing them carefully around the circle. Then, with trembling hands, Jason lit a match. The flames caught quickly, roaring around the spiral, devouring the feathers, the skull. Thick black smoke billowed upward, stinging our eyes. A strange, shrill cry pierced the air, echoing from the surrounding scrub. We spun around but saw nothing, yet the forest felt alive with anger. My heart hammered. Danny grabbed my hand. Fear flooding her features. I half expected the ground to split open, or the tree limbs to lash out at us. But the flames burned on, consuming the circle until it was just a patch of scorched earth. We backed away, coughing. The echoes of that cry lingered, bouncing through the pines. Finally, it subsided into silence. We hurried back to the RV, half expecting to be ambushed. But the forest was eerily quiet, as if it had withdrawn in shock. Once inside, I turned the key in the ignition. Click. I tried again. Click. The battery was still dead. Jason cursed under his breath, rummaging through compartments until he found a spare battery pack. I'd never seen him move so fast. He rigged it up, cursing at the tangle of wires. Finally, with a trembling hand, he motioned for me to try the ignition again. I turned the key. The engine coughed, then roared to life. Danny nearly collapsed. With relief, Jason banged a fist on the dash. Thank God. Without waiting, I jammed the RV into gear and started down the rough park road as fast as I dared, branches scraping the sides. My heart hammered with every bump, every twist in the trail. Would we make it to the main road? We didn't stop. Not when we saw that deer-like figure lurking behind a pine, or when we heard distant tapping on the windows again. We kept going, until the scrub opened up and we saw a paved road ahead. Only then did I allow myself to breathe. We found the ranger station not long after. By then, the sun was well up. The rangers stared at us like we were lunatics, dusty, sweaty, eyes full of terror. They offered us water, asked if we needed a medic. We told them something weird had happened in the backwoods, that our gear kept failing, that we'd found disturbing evidence of animal kills and strange symbols. They promised to send a patrol, but I could tell from their expressions they didn't buy half of our story. We limped the RV out of Jonathan Dickinson State Park, following the main roads. Eventually, civilization reappeared. Gas stations, strippy, malls, the comforting sprawl of normal life. But each of us was changed. Jason stared out the passenger window, eyes distant, as though expecting to see that pale, emaciated figure in every reflection. Danny sat in the back, holding her head, tears silently tracking down her face. I drove, my hands shaking on the wheel. We never had a neat explanation. We never found out if we truly banished Yatashi by burning that circle, or if something else let us leave. Maybe it's still out there, somewhere among the dry pines and black waters, wearing people's faces, waiting for new victims. What I do know is that whenever I close my eyes, I see that twisted version of me, stepping backward, into the fog with a grin that didn't belong on any human face. And sometimes, late at night, I hear a tap, like knuckles on glass, even when there's nobody near my window. My name is Tyler Morgan. I'm 24 years old, and I went looking for adventure. I found it in Jonathan Dickinson State Park, and I've never been the same since. My name is Noah Fenn. I'm 34 years old, and I've spent the past 6 months chasing ghosts, literal and metaphorical, all over Florida. I don't mean I'm a professional ghost hunter or a psychic. I'm a travel photographer with a soft spot for history and a new obsession with documenting so-called dead places. Old forts, drowned towns, abandoned theme parks. You name it, I've probably snapped a picture of it. You might say it's a weird hobby, but for me, it's become something more like therapy. My life took a sharp turn recently. A divorce I never saw coming. A child I never got to meet. Photographing places that time forgot is my way of reminding myself that everything vanishes eventually. That some wounds might not heal, but at least they don't define you forever. I'd been tipped off about Big Talbot Island State Park by an enthusiastic blog follower who claimed it was the single creepiest place on Florida's Atlantic coast. He raved about a driftwood-strewn shore called Boneyard Beach, where ancient oaks and pines stand stripped and skeletal against the sky, as well as salt marshes rumored to be haunted by the ghosts of drowned children. At first, I dismissed it as folklore, just a good story to spice up my photos. But the more I read, the more I felt drawn there. And so I found myself driving my little second-hand RV up the quiet roads near Jacksonville, heading toward a spit. of land cradled between the Atlantic Ocean and the twisting salt marshes of the Nassau River. My producer, well, ex-producer, had told me to punch up my documentary with dramatic flair. I told him I wasn't faking jump scares or swirling mists. If the location had genuine haunting vibes, my camera and mic would find them. Otherwise, I'd let the stark emptiness speak for itself. But something in me, a persistent curiosity, buzzed at the back of my mind. There was an old local legend about a group of colonial settlers who tried to ride out a smallpox outbreak in the 1700s. Something about children being quarantined away from the main settlement. Something about a devastating storm. Something about them never coming home. The sign for big Talbot Island State Park loomed large in the midday sun. I paid the small fee at the gate, chatted briefly with the ranger. He seemed distracted, but polite enough, and then drove down a narrow sandy road until I reached a camping area near the woods. Strictly speaking, you're supposed to stay at designated campsites, but I'd gotten permission from a friend who works in the park system to set up my modest RV near a less traveled portion of the inland trail. It was quiet, almost unnervingly. So, no other campers around. A canopy of live oaks and pines filtered the light into pale shards. Salt-laden wind rustled the leaves overhead. My phone flickered. No reception. Fine by me. I hadn't planned on calling anybody. If anything, the deep lack of a signal would keep me focused. I parked, propped open the RV door, and stepped out into the warm, brine-scented air. I started filming a quick introduction for my docuseries. Hey, it's Noah Fenn, coming to you from Big Talbot Island, Florida, where the Atlantic tears away. At the shore, leaving behind a graveyard of bleached driftwood. Local lore claims restless spirits lurk in these salt marshes. I'm here to find out if there's any truth to it, or if, like most urban legends, it's just wind and shadows playing tricks on the mind. I paused recording and inhaled deeply. My chest felt tight, as though the weight of the place pressed in on me. Then I shrugged it off and got to work. I always prefer to do a quick recon. I grabbed a handheld camera, locked the RV, and followed a faint sandy path that led toward the water. Within 15 minutes, I found the famous Boneyard Beach. The name hit home as soon as I stepped onto the sand. Dozens of dead, uprooted trees lay scattered across the shoreline like bones from a massive creature. Their trunks were pale, stripped, bare by sun and surf. The tide hissed around them, water lapping in a gentle but insistent rhythm. I set up my tripod and captured long shots, wide angles. The visuals were breathtaking, twisted branches reaching skyward as though still refusing to die. I took a moment to appreciate the uncanny stillness. Usually, Florida beaches bustle with families, surfers, or retirees strolling along. But here, only the wind and the waves and the occasional cry of a distant bird accompanied me. I walked about half a mile, the sand shifting underfoot until I reached a stretch of black rock formations near the water's edge. Black Rock Trail, if memory served. There, the ground seemed to sink away, forming tide pools and inlets that glimmered darkly. If a person wanted to get lost, to vanish, this place would swallow them without a fuss. I was so engrossed in my filming that at first I dismissed the sound of laughter echoing across the beach. It was faint, like children playing far away, but my eyes saw no one. I scanned the shoreline in both directions. Not a soul. Probably just the wind. Or gulls. Gulls can create bizarre cries that mimic laughter if the conditions are right. I shrugged, tried to ignore the prickle of unease at the back of my neck, and headed back to the RV. I made camp easily enough. A quick dinner of canned soup warmed on my little RV stove, accompanied by the ambient hush of sea breeze through the pines. I'd planned on editing footage, but my laptop battery was low and the generator was acting finicky. I had to keep my fridge going or risk spoiling the few groceries I had, so I left the editing for later. Fatigue hit me hard, something about the salt air and an emotional weight I couldn't fully articulate. I decided to crash early so I could photograph the sunrise at Boneyard Beach. Around midnight, I dozed off. At dawn, I woke to an orange glow streaming through the tiny RV window. My phone's alarm read 6:10 a.m. Perfect timing. I got dressed, splashed water on my face, and stepped outside. The air was pleasantly cool, tinted with sea salt. Then I froze. Tiny, wet handprints were smeared across the rear window of my RV. 5 fingers each, maybe the size of a small child's hands, pressed onto the dusty glass. Water dripped along the edges, leaving faint streaks. Around the RV itself, there were no footprints, child or otherwise. Only my own from the evening before. A trickle of fear crept up my spine. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe some stray kid from a nearby campsite was messing with me. But I was fairly certain no one else was around, let alone a child wandering in the night. I squatted down, looking for footprints in the powdery sand near the window. Nothing. The surface was unmarred. My instincts screamed at me that something wasn't right. Still, I swallowed the anxiety. It's just an odd occurrence, I told myself. My brain told me to wipe them away, but I hesitated. Instead, I snapped a few photographs for my records. If it was a hoax or a fluke, I wanted the evidence. Then I hopped into the driver's seat, turned the key, and drove toward the main beach lot, determined to catch the morning light on camera no matter how unsettled I felt. By mid-morning, I had some stellar shots of driftwood silhouettes in the sunrise. I felt calmer, more rational. I told myself the handprints were simply a leftover sign from some family that might have visited last night. Maybe the condensation made it look fresh. Deciding I needed coffee, I drove the RV to a small convenience store outside the park, near a gas station. The cashier was a talkative older man who grinned at my camera. He asked me what I was filming. When I mentioned historical tragedies in the region, he gave a low whistle. You might be talking about the kids in the marsh, right? Folks around here call them the children of the marsh. My granddaddy used to say you can hear 'em crying on a still night. My scalp prickled. I heard some laughter on the beach. Could have been gulls, I guess. He shrugged. Hard to say, but there's a story, older than the Spanish forts, about a group of settler children lost in a plague. People claim they were either drowned or left to fend for themselves in the marsh, so they wouldn't spread sickness. Some say they roamed the island looking for home. He sighed, leaning forward. I don't truck with ghosts, personally, but if you're filming, out there alone, watch your step in the wetlands. Tide can come in fast, and there's a reason they call it a drowning ground. Despite my skepticism, the mention of lost children knotted my stomach. I recalled the sorrow of losing my own child. Maybe I was reading too much into it, but something about hearing those kids' voices on the wind had rattled me. I thanked the cashier, grabbed my coffee, and headed back, half excited, half uneasy about what more I might discover. On my return, I decided to film some interior shots of the RV for my documentary. A behind-the-scenes look at my mobile living space, basically. I mounted my phone on a small tripod. So, this is my glamorous home away from home, I said. Perfect for cooking up microwave dinners and storing all my camera gear. I stopped mid-sentence. My foot was wet. A small puddle had formed near the kitchenette. I muttered a curse, figuring a pipe must have sprung a leak. But I sniffed the water. Salty, brackish. Salt water? That made no sense. The tap, water I filled up with at the station, was fresh. I opened the cupboard, found it dry. Checked the sink fittings, also dry. There was no sign of a leak from the roof. The water looked like it had just appeared out of nowhere. I cleaned it up, unsettled. I was about to resume filming when my phone alarm sounded. Battery low, 10%. Grumbling, I retrieved my external charger. But as I did, I noticed the phone's camera had picked up something else in the background. A flicker, a shape near the window behind me. I froze the frame, squinted. It looked like a child's face, pressed against the glass, but only for the briefest of instants before vanishing. Could it be a reflection? A camera glitch? I tried to replicate the shot. No luck. My heart thundered in my ears. I couldn't entirely dismiss it. All the bizarre pieces, wet handprints, saltwater puddles, a fleeting reflection, were forming a tapestry of something beyond rational explanation. I closed the blinds, every nerve on edge. The desire to pack up and get the hell out of there flared inside me. But then I remembered the reason I was here, capturing the truth behind these legends no matter how eerie. I told myself I'd push through. Night fell, bringing an unseasonable chill to the air. The generator was still acting, finicky, so I used a small battery-powered lantern to review the day's footage. Outside, the wind whistled softly. I tried to focus, but my eyelids grew heavy. Eventually, I fell into a restless sleep on the RV couch. I dreamt of a dark, endless marsh. I stood knee-deep in water that glimmered with faint moonlight. The reeds whispered around me, bending in the wind. And then I heard them. Children's voices calling out, "Don't leave us. Don't leave us again." In the dream, I tried to walk forward, but the mud sucked at my legs, pulling me down. Child-sized hands gripped my ankles, tugging me deeper. I gasped, flailed, woke up in a cold sweat, heart hammering. The lantern still glowed faintly, casting flickering shadows on the RV walls. I listened, body tense. Somewhere outside. Children's laughter rang out, faint, ephemeral, like it drifted through a veil of mist. I jumped to my feet, fumbling for my flashlight. I threw the RV door open, scanning the darkness. The laughter died away instantly, leaving only the rustle of leaves. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, fear twisting in my gut. Every sound made me flinch. Every shadow felt like a watcher. By morning, I was exhausted, unshaven, bleary-eyed. My plan had been to film the Saltmarsh area just north of Boneyard Beach, a place known for bizarre shapes at low tide, including old stumps and half-buried driftwood. Stubborn or not, I stuck to my plan. I parked near an old trail that wove through palmettos and ferns, eventually opening onto a wide, brackish marsh. The sun was high, glaring off patches of standing water. The muddy ground sucked at my boots with each step. A line of egrets took flight overhead, their white wings reflecting in the water below. Beautiful in a lonely way. I set up my camera. Then my foot bumped something solid beneath a thin layer of mud. Curious, I crouched down, scraping away the muck. It was a rectangular stone, weather-worn but clearly shaped by human hands. A foundation stone? My mind raced back to stories of an old colonial settlement that had disappeared. Perhaps this was a piece of it. A wave of excitement briefly overshadowed my fears. Historical gold for my project. As I lifted my camera to film, I felt the temperature drop, like an invisible cloud passing overhead. A breeze swept across the marsh, sending a briny chill through me. Then the laughter again, closer this time. Heart pounding, I spun around. Nothing, just the rustling. Grasses. My breath came fast and ragged. I realized I'd begun to feel watched. Not the casual sense of being observed, but the oppressive weight of a dozen unseen gazes. I forced myself to keep filming. This might be the remains of an 18th century building foundation, I narrated, voice shaking. If so, it might be connected to the local legends of families quarantined during a smallpox outbreak. Some claim children were left behind to drown in these marshes. My words caught in my throat. The mud at my feet stirred. Bubbles rose, or at least it seemed that way. I heard a faint splash just a few yards away, like someone was stepping around in the shallows. That was it. I'd had enough. I grabbed my gear and retreated toward the RV, never taking my eyes off the shifting water. My heart didn't slow until I reached the relative safety of the vehicle and locked the door. I tried to drive out of the park that afternoon, telling myself I could at least upload the footage at a hotel, get some rest. But when I turned the key, The engine coughed and died. I tried again. No luck. A battery icon blinked on the dash, in a mocking red glow. Impossible. I'd just driven not an hour ago. I double-checked the connections under the hood, found nothing obviously wrong. The generator, too, refused to start, as though a presence had invaded every piece of my equipment. Then came the water from the ceiling. It started with droplets, cold and brackish. I panned my flashlight up only to see the RV's roof was dry. Yet water dripped steadily, forming another puddle at my feet. Salty. Marsh water. My mind reeled. I stepped outside, looked at the roof from a ladder. No moisture, no cracks. The sky was cloudless, the day was bright. When I climbed back down, I heard something moving inside. I flung open the door. My heart nearly stopped. Staring at me from behind the driver's seat was a little girl in a threadbare white dress, her hair plastered to her cheeks as though drenched. Her eyes were huge, brimming with sorrow. I tried to speak, but she vanished, gone in an instant, leaving behind only the stench of stale marsh muck. Was I hallucinating? Sleep deprivation could cause illusions, but this felt too real. I stepped inside, found no trace of footprints, yet the stink remained. I sank onto the couch, trembling. My camera's lens glinted at me from the table, silent and unhelpful. I cursed myself for not filming, as if that would make the ghosts any less real. Night rolled in again. The RV refused to start. I told myself I'd walk to the ranger station. The next morning, maybe hitch a ride to the nearest mechanic. At least that was a normal plan. But that night proved worse than before. Somewhere past midnight, I woke from a half-doze to a faint splashing sound. This time, I was determined to get evidence. I turned on my handheld camera, stepped outside, and followed the sound. The moon was bright, illuminating the palmettos and twisted oaks. The path led me to a little clearing near the marsh. There, standing on a patch of damp sand, was the girl again. She was about 8 or 9 years old, barefoot. Her dress looked like it came from another century, edges tattered. Marsh water trickled off her hem. The wind rustled, but she was utterly still. My heart pounded so hard I could barely hold the camera steady. "Who are you?" I called, voice cracking. She stared at me with wide eyes. I noticed her lips moving, but no sound came out. She lifted a hand, beckoned me closer. I took a cautious step forward, camera rolling. She vanished, just blinked out like a dying light. But her shoes remained, a tiny pair of well-worn leather slippers, soaked and lying in the sand. When I knelt to touch them, they were cold, sopping wet. Not an illusion. I swung my camera around, filming the entire area. Nothing. The only footprints were my own. Shaken, I returned to the RV, anxious to see what I'd recorded. The video showed me walking through the woods, shining my flashlight. But in the spot where the girl should have been, there was only distortion, static lines, warping the image. I heard my own voice, quavering, "Who are you?" Then the screen flickered, and for a brief instant I could make out children's faces, plural, peering at me from the darkness. The image froze, and a child's whisper came through the speaker. "Don't leave us again." I slammed the camera down, breath ragged. My mind reeled with memories I'd tried to bury. My wife's miscarriage, the guilt, the sense of having failed as a father before I even had the chance. Now I felt those old wounds tear wide open. These drowned children, if that's what they were, seemed to be twisting my own grief into a supernatural torment. I wanted to scream at them to leave me alone, but I also felt a stab of pity. Why had they chosen me? The next day, I forced myself to gather my gear and attempt the walk to the ranger station. The roads were deserted, silence pressing on me from all sides. About a mile out, I noticed a thin trail of water seeping across the asphalt, leading off into the woods. I tried to ignore it, but it kept branching along my path until it finally curved toward the marsh. Against my better judgment, I followed it. The forest parted, revealing a shallow stretch of brackish water. The mud gave off an oily sheen, as if something had recently been disturbed. Nearby, partially uncovered in the muck, lay wooden toys, hand-carved figures, old spinning tops, a little horse on wheels. My blood ran cold. They must have been buried for centuries. Then I felt a presence. I spun around, heart in my throat. Surrounding me, half hidden behind trees and reeds, were shadows of children. Small shapes in ragged clothes, eyes luminous. Their combined whisper filled my ears like a rustling wind. "Don't leave us. We remember you." I stumbled back, camera clutched in a trembling hand, but I forced myself to keep recording. The shapes began gliding closer. My mind snapped between terror and pity. "I'm sorry," I muttered, not even sure what I was apologizing for. Was I apologizing for the settlers who abandoned them, or for my own lost child? A swirl of movement. To my left. A boy with hollow cheeks stepped forward, eyes wide with longing. Behind him, a girl in that same white dress I'd seen before. She lifted a mud-slick toy horse, offered it to me. I don't understand," I whispered. The hush of the marsh swallowed my voice. The mud churned around my ankles. The water rose, impossibly fast, as if a wave had crept in. In seconds, it was nearly knee-deep. My camera recorded the gurgling sounds, the children's outlines flickering in and out of the shallows. Then their voices echoed. "You were supposed to protect us." The revelation shook me. It felt as though they thought I was a father figure from centuries past. My reflection in the water twisted. I saw an older man, gray-bearded, wearing colonial garb. The shock coursed through me like lightning. I felt I was losing my grip on reality entirely. I took a step back, nearly stumbling. "I'm not him," I choked out. "I'm so sorry. I'm not—" But they surged closer, water sloshing, reaching for me with small, cold hands. One touched my wrist and I felt a chill so profound it seemed to freeze my bones. My heart hammered. Dizziness washed over me. Through the camera lens I glimpsed their faces contorting between sorrow and accusation. Fight or flight. I heaved myself backward, pushing through the waist-deep water, ignoring the suck of the mud. My free hand clawed at the branches overhead, pulling me up onto a small rise of dry ground. The children's shapes pressed in, almost cornering me. My breath came in ragged gasps. Desperate, I yanked off my backpack and rummaged inside for a flare gun I used for emergencies. The bright orange tube gleamed in the murk. I wasn't even sure what good it would do, but I fired into the air. The flare hissed, painting the trees with red light. The children recoiled momentarily, their moan-like whispers turning to a hiss. The air grew thick with the scent of decay. I stumbled away, using the confusion to run blindly through the brush. I kept running, heart slamming in my chest until I burst out onto the main road. My clothes dripped salty marsh water, my boots caked in mud. No sign of the children behind me, though I heard a lingering echo of their voices in the wind. Hours later, a patrolling ranger truck found me wandering, near the edge of the park, disoriented. The ranger, a woman in her 50s, approached cautiously. She asked if I was hurt, if I needed a medic. I mumbled something about my RV, about children. She gave me a worried look, put me in the passenger seat, and drove me to a small ranger station near the entrance. I expected to see my RV still stranded where I left it, but it was gone. "Must have had it towed," she said, though she didn't seem certain who would have done so. I asked her to help me search the area, but then night was falling again and she insisted I wait until morning. An uneasy tension radiated from her. I think she suspected I was on something or having a breakdown. She offered me a cot in the station's back room. Exhausted, I lay there, trying to still my shaking hands. At some point, I must have passed out. When I woke, a dull morning light filtered through the station's high windows. The ranger was gone. replaced by a note on the desk. Out on patrol. We'll be back. Stay put. I found my camera in my backpack. The battery had died. On impulse, I recharged it using the station's outlet. My fingers trembled as I opened the files. Most clips looked the same as I'd seen them. Marsh scenes, beach scenes. Then I found the final recording. My breath caught. It showed me standing in waist-deep water, children's silhouettes around me. Their faces, though half obscured by static, were heartbreakingly clear in moments. Hollow-eyed, solemn, reaching out. The footage ended abruptly as I scrambled up the bank, but the final frame wouldn't let me pause or skip. It was stuck, frozen on a single image, the little girl holding the soaked leather slippers. The audio hissed faintly. I leaned in, straining to hear. A child's whisper slid through my headphones. "You'll come back." I yanked the headphones off. My pulse thundered. So it was all real. The illusions, the drowned children, the watery footprints. And they still wanted me. I left the station later that day, hitching a ride to the nearest town. I never found my RV. The rangers eventually called me, saying they located a battered vehicle with no license plate deep in the palmettos, but it wasn't mine. My footage, though, is the only proof that something truly unnatural happened on Big Talbot Island. I tried to piece my life back together. But as the weeks passed, I found myself haunted by half-dreams of the girl, silent in the marsh. By the memory of those tiny wet handprints on the rear window. Sometimes I wake to the sound of splashing water and see fleeting shapes in the corner of my vision. And the slippers. They hang from my closet doorknob, though I've never physically touched them again. I can't explain how they got there or why I'm too afraid to throw them out. I've considered going back. Part of me thinks that if I give those children the memorial they deserve, if I speak their names aloud, maybe they'll find rest. But a deeper part of me fears that if I do, I'll be theirs for good. That they'll pull me under the brackish water and drown me in their sorrow. So I write this as a warning and a confession. I went to Big Talbot Island looking for a story about tragedy and lost history, and I left with something far more personal. The drowned children are still there, waiting in the salt marsh. If you go to that lonely shore, you might see them, or hear them, or, if your own heart carries enough grief, they might just adopt you as the father or mother they never had, and you might not come back. I can't tell you how to stop them because I haven't stopped them myself. All I can say is, if you find tiny, wet handprints on your window, turn around, walk away. Some stories aren't meant to be finished. Some children never learn how to let go.